Well, a few months ago, I was on the Forbes website and I came across this pretty fascinating article that was entitled Highest Paid Dead Celebrities of 2022. And Charles Schultz was on there, Dr. Seuss was on there, John Lennon was on there, but they actually didn't make the top 5. And so I thought the top 5 was pretty fascinating, so I'm going to share with you the top 5 highest grossing earning dead celebrities of 2022. You ready? You ready for this? Okay, here is number 5. James Brown at $100 million. Yeah, you gave me $100 million, I would feel good as well, and I would sing it. Okay, here's number 4. Elvis Presley at $110 million. Now, I know some of you are like, he shouldn't be on this list. He's still alive. No, he's actually on the list, okay? Just for some, he's on the list. Okay, number 3, David Bowie at $250 million. Yeah, David, his record catalog, complete recording catalog, was sold in 2022, and so it made Ziggy Stardust a whole lot of money. Here's actually number 2, this is surprising to me, was Kobe Bryant. And if you can believe this, I mean, it's almost been 4 years since that tragic helicopter crash. Well, you might not know this about Kobe, but Kobe owns 7% of Body Armor energy drink. And so when Coca-Cola purchased it for $5.6 billion, that netted Kobe's estate $400 million. Now, can anyone guess who number 1 is? OCF, can you guess who number 1 is? No, that's what I thought too. Michael Jackson? Nope, he is not. Here's who number 1 is. J.R.R. Tolkien at $500 million. Yeah, this is interesting because this is over 80 years after Lord of the Rings was written, over 60 years after The Hobbit. And so what happened was a video company for $500 million purchased the rights to Middle-earth Enterprises. Yeah, for $500 million, I'll become whatever Hobbit you want me to be as far as that's concerned, you know. But what's interesting is it's always amazing to me that people that are long gone, that can continue to have influence and be relevant to the next generation. And while all those names are important and well known, none of them compare to the most influential life that has ever been lived, and nobody saw this coming. I'm going to read to you just a little bit of his story and see if you can guess who it is. Here's his story. He was born in a small, obscure village to a peasant woman under questionable circumstances. He never went to college, never visited a large city. In fact, he never traveled more than 200 miles from the place where he was born. He never wrote a book, held public office, or owned a home, or started a business. He was only 33 years old when the tide of public opinion turned against him, prompting even his closest friends to abandon him and his enemies to convict him. He was nailed to a wooden cross between 2 criminals. His executioners gambled for his clothing. It was the only property he had on earth. After he died, he was buried in a borrowed grave. Now, can anyone guess who that was? Nobody can. I appreciate that. Hey, when you're a little pointer, when you're in church and the question is thrown out, and if you say Jesus, I mean, it's like 99% of the time you're going to get it right, okay? So, yes, the answer is Jesus. Thank you very much for leaving me hanging. Jesus of Nazareth is arguably the central figure of the entire human race. In fact, his life marks out our concept of time. Well, today we are in week 2 of our series, Permission to Deconstruct. And we are looking at a topic that is very, very popular in culture nowadays, and that's this whole idea of deconstruction. And here's how we're defining deconstruction for our series. We are defining it as the process of examining, questioning, and even extreme cases, rejecting your faith. You see, here's what all of us will go through, whether you're a faith person or not a faith person, is that you eventually get to a place where you begin to question or have doubts about maybe what you've always believed in or things that you've started to believe in. And for most of us, we don't know what to do with those questions and doubts. And so a part of us begins to think, well, maybe something is wrong with faith or something is wrong with me. We'll often try to suppress those questions and doubts. And what happens when you suppress the questions and doubts is they don't get smaller, they actually get bigger. And if something is not done to deal with those questions and doubts in a healthy way, you might find yourself walking away from faith or staying away from faith unnecessarily. But the first word of our series title is really important, and that's this idea of permission. And what I want to do is, if you're a Jesus follower, you'd consider yourself one, and you have questions and doubts, I just want to give you permission to acknowledge those questions and doubts. Because that doesn't mean that something is wrong with you or wrong with faith. It just means you've got questions and doubts, and you know what? That's normal. And not only is that normal, it's important. Because as we said last week, here's the big idea for our series. That deconstruction doesn't have to derail your faith, which if we don't handle it in a healthy way, it could end up doing that. But it could actually be an opportunity to deepen your faith as you wrestle through some of these questions and doubts. And if you're not a Jesus follower, I want to give you permission to acknowledge your questions and your doubts, your skepticism, even your disagreement as far as that's concerned. Because we believe if you would wrestle through and be open to wrestle through those questions and doubts in a healthy way, you might actually discover that there is a faith that you have never realized before, and that faith could change your life. Now, last week, I talked about just what does healthy deconstruction look like? Because our culture says this, well, deconstruction is the end goal, so deconstruct just to deconstruct. But we said deconstruction does not have to be the end goal. Because as we looked at last week, deconstruction can be a process that leads to reconstruction. Now, today what I want to do is I want to talk about the most important question as it relates to the Christian faith. I mean, everything begins and ends with this question right here. Who is Jesus? People have all different ideas and ideologies of who Jesus is. You know, there's Jesus, the wise sage. There's Jesus, the social justice warrior. There's Jesus, the political revolutionary. There's Jesus, the holy man, like the Buddha or Confucius. There's Jesus, the prophet in Islam. There's the Republican version of Jesus. There's the Democrat version of Jesus. There's even a vegan Jesus that's being talked about now, you know? God forbid, all right? Now, who is he, though? Here's what I want to do today. I want to first talk through what did Jesus say about himself, and then move to can we believe it? And then the third thing, which this is the one that most of us, we never really consider this one. Why does it even matter anyways? Now, there's some people who question whether Jesus ever existed or is he just a myth altogether. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because no credible historian or scholar, no matter where they stand when it comes to Christianity, denies that Jesus, the man that we see in the Bible, existed in time and history because the evidence is overwhelming. There's all sorts of evidence in the Bible, but beyond that, you can read books written by first century historians that point to and talk about this man known as Jesus. And I'll give you just one example. There's a historian, a Jewish historian named Flavius Josephus. Here's his picture. A good-looking lad, I would say so myself. And once again, he's a Jewish historian, and he is actually the best source that we have for first century Palestine. And he mentions Jesus time and time again in his book. And we also have other people back then. We have Roman officials, Tacitus and Pliny the Younger, just to name a few, who all lived back then and talk about Jesus. But the big question is, what did Jesus say about himself? Now, Jesus talked about his identity a bunch, and what I want to do is I want to look at two examples of this. And the first one is actually found in the Gospel of Matthew. If you're new to the Bible, this is just one of the 4 biographies we have of Jesus. And Matthew was one of Jesus' disciples. And so when we read the book of Matthew, we are reading an eyewitness account of Jesus' life. Now, a little background for you. Jesus is going around doing miracles. And not only is he doing miracles, he's teaching. And then he's going around and doing something that you didn't do back then. He's going around forgiving people of their sins, which is something only God can do. And then Jesus just throws out this question to the disciples. And here's the question he throws out. He says, so who do people say the Son of Man is? Now, the Son of Man wasn't Jesus talking about himself in the third person. If you look at the Old Testament book of Daniel, there is a figure of a vision in heaven, and this figure had a both divine and human aspect to them, and all in one figure. And so this is this idea of the Son of Man. And the Son of Man was someone that God would send and give authority to judge all of the nations. And so that title is a big deal. And so Jesus says, okay, so who is the Son of Man? What's the word on the street about me? What are they saying on X, formerly known as Twitter? Because, you know, everybody's reading that. Now, this question, Jesus throws this out there, is a very important question, or he wouldn't have asked this question. And the disciples reply this. Some say John the Baptist. And so much like the rumor of Elvis still being alive, many people thought back then that Jesus was John the Baptist back from the dead. And then others say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. And so Jeremiah and Elijah were two very, very well-known prophets back then. And so the disciples are like, okay, Jesus, they're not really sure, but they know that you are much more than just a really smart rabbi. And then Jesus turns it on him. He says, okay, but what about you? Who do you say that I am? And so he turns the question from people to getting very personal. And then, of course, of all of them, Simon Peter answers, and he says this, he goes, you're the Messiah. Now, this was a title that can also be translated Christ. And so we think, Jesus Christ, that Christ was his last name. It's actually a title. Jesus the Messiah is what that means. And the Messiah means anointed one or anointed king. And so the idea is that God would send a Messiah or a king who would usher in his kingdom where things on earth would be done as they were in heaven. But then Peter's not done. Then he says, and the Son of the living God, which is another title. And so this is before the resurrection. And so Peter's still putting the pieces together. And he's going, I'm not really sure, Jesus, but we do know that with all these things going on, that you share some of God's essence. Now, after the resurrection, when Peter put all the pieces together, he would say, I know who you are now. You are God in a body. And so what Peter is saying, he's saying, Jesus, here's who you are. You are God's final king over the entire human race. And then listen to Jesus' response to Peter's response. He says this, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but my Father in heaven. Now notice Jesus doesn't say, Peter, what are you smoking, man? Don't even echo things. I don't say things like that. That's ridiculous. No, he goes, you're right, Peter. And you know what? That was revealed to you directly from God. And then he says this, and I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, some translate hell, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. And so this declaration, Peter's declaration, that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, is the only thing that the church has agreed upon since the very beginning. That the identity of Jesus is the only thing that the church organizes and prioritizes itself around. Now, the second example, Jesus gets much more direct with his response. And so once again, the disciples are confused about his identity. And Jesus is making it worse because he's saying things like, I came directly from God, and if you've seen me, you've seen God. And then finally, Philip, one of the disciples, he just says what's on everybody's mind. And he just says this, hey, Lord, show us the Father, and that'll be enough for us. You ever think something like that, or maybe even pray something like that? You're like, okay, God, would you just make yourself known to me, and then I'll believe you? It's like, God, I can't see you, okay? And you could end all this suspension and all this doubt by just allowing me to see you in some way, whatever that means. And if you would, then I'll believe in you. Just kind of show us who you are. Well, this is what Philip is saying. And then listen to what Jesus' response is. Don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you such a long time? And then listen to this. Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. Now, can you imagine what the reaction would be if I got up, today before the message and I said, hey, Oak Creek Franklin, glad you're here, Greenfield. Hey, listen, it's going to be a great day for you because by being with me, you are being with God. Now, can you imagine if I said that, what the reaction would be like? Okay, I think I'm going to exit stage right and I will never be back here again. But this is exactly what Jesus says about himself. And then he's not done. He says this, well, the words I say to you, I don't speak on my own authority. In other words, if you want to know what God has to say, you listen to me. And then rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. In other words, if you want to know what God is up to in the world, would you just watch me? Because my words and my works, they reveal to you what the Father is like. And the disciples are like, big claim. Why could we believe and why should we believe you, Jesus? And then listen to his response. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. And I want you to think about that word evidence for a minute. For many of us, we think of the word evidence and faith and we go, two separate categories. They don't belong with each other. And Jesus seems to go, no, actually, they do belong with each other. In other words, when it comes to faith, you should never check your mind at the door. And so Jesus says, I don't want you to believe just in belief because I tell you to. What I want you to do is I want you to look back and some of the things that you've seen. You've seen me cast out demons. You've seen me heal the sick. Listen, what other human being has ever done that? Aren't those things that only God can do? You know, here's what Jesus was really saying. Jesus wasn't just trying to give an explanation or the best explanation for God. He is the best explanation of God because he is God. And no other major religious leader has made such a claim. Let me ask you this question. When you hear the words God and Jesus, does that create tension for you? When you hear the words God and Jesus, does that stir up some emotion for you? And which one do you like better? And for most of us, what we end up doing, we just kind of throw around God and Jesus interchangeably. Like, God and Jesus, I don't know, but maybe I should God here and Jesus, and not sure how they're connected and all that stuff. And so we're not really sure. And Jesus comes along and smiles and says, you can be sure. If you have seen me, you have seen God. Now, it is really easy the disciples believed it, okay, maybe it's easy for them and all that stuff because they were there and all that stuff. But you know what? Why can I and why can you believe that? And I just want to give you 3 reasons why we can. And I'm just going to give you kind of higher level views of these reasons. If you want to do more research, I would encourage you to do that. But I think there's 3 main reasons. And here's the first one. Jesus' teachings. Many of Jesus' teachings have formed the foundation for Western thought and culture. You know, our beliefs about forgiveness and generosity and compassion and love and the afterlife, many of these things actually come from the teachings of Jesus. And he told stories or parables that are still being told today by both Christians and non-Christians around the world. I mean, think about this. We all have heard the story of the Good Samaritan, and we've heard the story of the prodigal son. You see, no one has influenced humanity more than the teachings of Jesus. But then there's the second one that I think is really important, and that is his miracles, or as he called evidence of who he is. Jesus did things like this. He walked on water. He raised the dead. He spoke to the weather, and the weather listened to him. You know how cool that would be? I'd be like 80 and sunny. 80 and sunny. I mean, every single day, you know, I rebuke you, snow, you are gone. I mean, he did things like that. He cast out demons. I mean, just think about these things. These are things that are beyond human capabilities and things that science cannot explain. And we have evidence of this through biblical accounts. Many of these were written by people who were there, but we have more than just accounts in the Bible that record these things. You can actually read books written around the time of Jesus that actually attribute miracle-working power to Jesus of Nazareth as a historical fact. Third thing, his resurrection. That Jesus died, and then he rose from the dead, which is his greatest miracle. Let me ask you this question. Who would you say is the most successful trial lawyer in the world? I know it's a hotbed question for everybody, okay? You know, who would you say that is? F. Lee Bailey, Johnny Cochran, David Gruber? I mean, which one would you say is the most, some of you got that, I appreciate that. Who would you say is the most well-known in the world right now, most successful? Well, we can go to an authoritative source, the Guinness Book of World Records. And the Guinness Book of World Records tells us who it is. Here's what the good book says. It says, most successful attorney, Sir Lionel Lucco, who succeeded in getting his 245th consecutive murder acquittal by January 1st, 1985. 245 consecutive wins in the courtroom. I don't know how much he costs, but if I need it, I'm hiring that dude, you know, when you think about it. It's an incredible streak. Well, there was a time in Sir Lionel's life where he just began to wrestle with some spiritual things and wonder about the meaning of life and all that stuff. And so he decided to investigate the resurrection of Jesus. And so he took his expertise in law, researched it, and here's what Sir Lionel has included. He says, I say unequivocally that the evidence, there's our word again, for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is so overwhelming that it compels acceptance by proof. which leaves absolutely no room for doubt. And after weighing the evidence, Sir Lionel became a Jesus follower. Now you might say, listen, Mark, I can't believe that someone, died and then rose from the dead. Listen, I know it's a huge claim. And if that's you and you're doubtful about that, I would encourage you, why don't you read some of the things that Sir Lionel wrote and people like Lee Strobel and others who went through a very similar process. But here's just what you need to know, big picture. We have more evidence for the resurrection of Jesus than we have evidence for that Julius Caesar, that Julius Caesar ever lived, or that Alexander the Great died at age 33. And you know what? We just take those things as historical fact. You see, this idea that Jesus did miracles and then he rose from the dead, these are huge things to consider, because it's one thing, you think about Jesus, it's one thing to claim to be God, and then it's another thing to do the things only God can do. It's like this. It's one thing for me to claim to be Giannis, and as you can see here, which I don't understand why you're laughing, but I understand, once again, the physiques are similar and all that stuff. I get that. So it's one thing for me to claim to be Giannis, and you're going, I could see those things. But then here's the thing. It's another thing for me to do only the things that Giannis can do. And the same thing is true with Jesus. It's one thing for him to claim to be God, but it's a whole other thing for him to do the things only God can do. Now you might be thinking, who cares? So what? Why does it matter who Jesus is? Well, you might have never thought about this before. But the most important thing about you and the most important thing about me is your vision of God. And Christian theology and Christian spirituality at its core is the healing of your vision and my vision of God. And not only that, but it's the reunion of that vision to our soul. It's what's going to make us fully human. You see, this is where neuroscience and theology actually completely agree with each other, because here's the thing. We become like our vision of God. And even if you don't really believe in God, or even don't think God is really that important in your life, here's what's going to end up eventually happening to you. We will eventually become with what we replace God with in our mind. You see, because we're all human beings. And as human beings, we search for meaning because we're wired to search for meaning and purpose. And we will become whatever we think is the most meaningful and purposeful in our life. And so if that's sexual expression, it'll be sexual expression. If that's individual autonomy, it'll be that. If that's happiness, it'll be that. If that is status, if that is stuff, you just can kind of fill in the blank, and we will become whatever we think is the ultimate meaning and purpose of life. This is why mid-century author A.W. Tozer, he wrote this. I think this is dead on. He said, we tend, by a secret law of the soul, to move toward our mental image of God, meaning we become like whoever we think God is like or is not like. You see, there's something in all of us, that we want to know what God is like because we want to know God. I've even talked to atheists before, and they've been like, man, if God exists, I would love to know what he's like. You see, this is the deepest longing in every human soul. And the reason why Jesus asked his disciples, who do you say that I am? And the reason why he answered Philip the way that he answered him is because this is Jesus' way of saying, hey, I've came to give you a full vision of what God is like. And I'm here on behalf of God because he wants to be known by you. I've been married to my wife, Donna, for 27 years. And I can still remember when, we were dating and I was going to ask her to marry me and go through that whole process. Now, for me, that was kind of tough. I know people go like, oh, yeah, man, I can't wait and all that stuff. For me, because I struggled with commitment back then, I was like, oh, man, I know I should, but I was just scared to death about it. But even though I was scared to death about it, I was like, okay, I know that when I propose to Donna, it needs to be a few things. It needs to be special. Because this is one of those days and one of those moments that, a couple, assuming years ago, they'll look back in that time, hey, do you remember when we, and they'll tell that story and all this stuff. It needed to be personal, it needed to be something between just her and me and our story. And for me, it just needed to be unique. And for me, I really needed to go out of my way to make this one really good because I had asked her before, and then I broke off the engagement, so I had to overcome a lot, which is a whole different story, all right? And so the second time, I was like, okay, this needs to be a really big deal. Now, I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine, okay, I'm getting ready to propose to Donna, and I come up with an idea. And my idea is this. I go, you know what? I'm not going to do it. I'm going to have one of my good friends do it. And so, I go see one of my good friends. I say, hey, listen, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to propose to Donna for me. And I give him the ring, and I give him chocolates. I said, she really likes chocolates like this, And then I have a script printed out. And I said, okay, I just want you to just read word for word this script, okay? And then hopefully that she says yes. Now, some of you ladies are going, she ain't going to say yes, okay? But let's just say, okay, if she says yes, would you get a picture of you and her together so you can kind of capture that moment that we can put on my office, and all this stuff so I can always remember that moment? Would you do that for me? Now, you hear me say that and you go, that is absolutely ridiculous. Why? Because when it would come from the matter of telling Donna how much I love her, I'm not going to send someone else to do it. I'm going to do it myself. And the same is true with God. When it came to the matter of just letting us know just how much he loves us, he didn't send someone else to do it. He did it himself because God would have it no other way. Jesus went to his disciples and he said, who do you say that I am? And the power behind that question is, honestly, it wasn't just for them. This was a question for every single one of us. And if you're a Jesus follower, and you would say, okay, I believe that, that Jesus is God's son, and you're following him with your life, can I just ask you a question? Can I just poke at you a little bit? Knowing that that's true, how are you responding to him? Are you indifferent or apathetic about it? Are you someone that's kind of like just picking and choosing? You're like, okay, I like this part of following Jesus, but I don't really like that, because I have different feelings and beliefs about that whole thing, and that's kind of complicated, and that's difficult, and that's challenging. Are you someone it's just not really a priority for you because other things are just a priority for you? Let me ask you, if he is God's son, and he came for you, how should you be responding? And here's how I think we should be responding. We should say every single day, Jesus, the answer is yes, even before you ask. That we should be so committed to growing. And here's why we should be so committed to growing as we become more like Jesus. Because as we said before, we become like our vision of God. And the more that we grow and step in and become more like Jesus, here's what's going to happen to you. You are not only going to become the person that you want to be, it's going to get bigger than that. You are going to become the person that God created you to be, and that is so much better than any vision that we have for our life. But if you're not a Jesus follower, and you hear this and you go, I don't know, I don't know, big claims, and they are big claims. Listen, they really, really are. And you're just like wise sage or, vegan Jesus, you're kind of wrestling around with those things. You're just not really sure. Let me ask you a question. What if Jesus came to reveal to us what the Father is like? Listen, what if that's true? Because if it's true, I think it's worth wrestling with. It's worth doing the research on. It's worth asking questions about. Because if Jesus really came, here's what you're going to discover. You're going to discover if Jesus really did come to reveal to us what the Father is like and to deliver to us personally just how much he loves us and just how much you matter to him, I promise you, you step into that, your life will never be the same. Let me pray for us. Father, this is pretty mind-boggling stuff. And I think for those of us who would say, hey, I believe that, I think it's just so easy to lose sight of just what an amazing, mind-boggling thing that is. And that we should never take that lightly. Because to think that you would actually come, live among us, and then the King of all kings would actually, as king, die for his creation. That is absolutely mind-boggling. And our response should be because of that. If you would do that for me and you love me that much, why not? I'm in. And so if there's areas where we're going like, I'm not in, may we just remember, that you have come to reveal to us the words and works of none other than our Father in heaven. And for those who just go, I'm just not there, God, I just thank you that you love the wrestling, you love the journey. And I pray they would have the courage to just ask questions, take steps, be vulnerable and open with those things. And God, may they discover that when it came to delivering the ultimate message of you are my son or you are my daughter, you came to deliver that message yourself. God, thank you that we have the permission to ask questions and to doubt and to wrestle, and we get to do it together. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.